Chapter 2. Wendy. The phone twittered away on the nightstand. Small red and yellow lights flashed as the base unit concurred with the handset that a call was coming in. The title Kathy's cell was visible against the LED screen. A young woman in her early 20s grabbed the handset in one hand and with the other, turned on the bedside lamp. "Hey Kathy, what's going on?" Swinging her legs over the side of the bed, she listened to the person on the other end, and noted the time on the nightstand clock. It read 3:30 a.m. "Are you sure?" "Okay. Listen, just stay put and do not go outside, okay? I'll be right overs, just stay inside." Hanging up, she moved quickly to her closet and donned a pair of gray sweats, and slipped on a pair of socks, which she snatched from her dresser. The outfit was completed with the addition of a pair of runners. As he stepped into the trailer's living room, the door from the bedroom which she had just vacated opened, and a young female appeared. She was Wendy's age and wore only a t-shirt. Her dark eyes and shining black hair showed her indigenous heritage. "Wendy, where are you going? It's not even daylight," Kathy called. She thought she saw something at the cabin tonight. "I'm just on my way up to make sure that everything is all right. Go back to bed, Tabby." Suppressing a yawn, her roommate came out of the room and sat at the kitchen table. Reaching behind her, she flipped the switch on the coffee machine. "I'm up now. I don't have to be at the inn until 10 o'clock, so what do you mean? Saw something? Like a rat, a bear, or something else?" "I don't know," shrugged Wendy. Then, as if he remembered something, she disappeared back into the bedroom, returning with a set of keys in her hand. "Can I borrow your truck, Tabby? I won't be long." She headed to the door of the trailer. Tabby got up and came to where Wendy stood. "Well, I didn't think you were going to ride your ATV up the highway." She leaned forward and gave Wendy a hug. The warmth of her filled Wendy's senses, as she hugged back. Tabby was her best friend and fellow co-worker at the Burns Inn who had come to stay at the trailer a few weeks earlier. The two women meshed together in a seamless friendship from the very first day. "It will all be fine," Wendy assured her. Putting on her jacket, she pocketed the car keys and opened door. Tabby stopped and rested her hand on the door jamb. "You be careful, right?" The cabin was just a 40-minute drive from where Wendy lived in her mobile home. Hers was one of several double wides which sat on the family property. Next door to her home were two more trailers owned by her cousins, complete with a large dog run for their 5 tracking dogs that her cousins used in their guide business. Beyond that was her great-uncle Lucas's trailer, and further off, by itself, down near the water, was her grandmother Serafina's smaller motor home. Privacy was provided by way of a high chain-link fence which surrounded the entire property. Leaving the compound, as some called it, Wendy drove along the dirt road to the pavement on Highway 7 and headed east into the dim light of a false dawn. As she negotiating the twist and turns, the whining noise of the truck's off-road tires filled the cab of the pickup with a faint rumbling buzz. Oddly enough, hearing the rubber biting into the asphalt was a comforting noise. It lent an air of stability to her passage over the dew-covered pavement. At this time of morning the road had little traffic, in either direction, so she meant to make the trip in less than 30 minutes. Skirting the town of Agassiz and speeding along the highway to Ruby Creek, she flipped up the lid of the console, which separated the bucket seats, and dug out a plastic container of Mentos. Checking the expiry date, before she unscrewed the top. Shaking the container, she took a candy and popped it into her mouth, enjoying the initial heat from the peppermint. Her thoughts turned to Kathy. "Not a great deal," she thought aloud. Something rubbed up against the side of the cabin during the night and made some noises that freaked her out a bit. But Wendy never knew Kathy to ever be spooked. She sucked her mint through her teeth, as she watched the shadowy forms of roadside trees speed by. Kathy had been married to a conservation officer for 30 years. She spent a lot of time in the bush. She was familiar with the animals, but she had sounded frightened on the phone. Wendy figured that it had to be a bear, or maybe even an elk. The government recently introduced a herd north of the lake. Her headlights illuminated the empty parking lot of the Sasquatch Inn as she continued onto the bridge over the Harrison River. She remembered first meeting Kathy at her mother's funeral. She had been only 8 years old at the time. But she remembered the tall blonde lady who spoke kindly to her on that day. She saw her once again at the Burns Inn, where her grandmother sold native handicrafts in the gift store. This time Wendy was a teenager. Again, Kathy had spoken kindly to her. And this time, Wendy was able to return the same. Their friendship had grown from that point. And Wendy had helped Kathy at the cabin's orchard since Brian passed. It had been her grandmother's idea. And Serafina was not a person who would brook arguments. For years Wendy would spend many a day in Kathy's company. The older woman loved hearing the stories of the Skulets people, and Wendy was one of the few who could speak about such. Grandmother Serafina was the reason for that. She thought of Wendy as someone special, someone to be nurtured and trained in the ways of the elders. Wendy knew lessons which others did not. She could speak her tribal language where others could not. And secretly through Serafina she learned about the ancient mystics of their people, something that many dared not. Dawn was breaking above the ridge line in the east, when she pulled in behind Kathy's pickup at the cabin. It was not lost upon Wendy that Kathy did not come out to greet her. Walking up the front steps she called out but received no reply. Opening the front door the girl saw that there was a light from the kitchen at the end of the hall. "Kathy?" she called again. Upon entering the kitchen, she found the older woman, sitting at the table sipping from a cup. Nearby a shotgun leaned against the sill of the kitchen window. The blinds were tightly closed, but the scene was illuminated by a single bulb in the center of the kitchen ceiling. "Are you all right, Kate?" The woman at the table said nothing for a moment, her face pale and haggard. I'm just a little." Wendy walked over to the table and leaned forward to hug the woman who was obviously distraught. Kathy put down her mug and squeezed Wendy's hand, as it lay upon her shoulder. "Do you want coffee?" she asked. Rising, Kathy went to a cupboard and took down a mug. "I just made a pot. I'll take care of that," said Wendy, taking the mug from her and directing her back to her chair. Filling the mug from a carafe on the kitchen counter she turned to the kitchen table. "So, Kate, what's going on?" asked Wendy, taking off her jacket and placing it on the back of her chair. "I just got a scare, that's all. I am sure it will all turn out to be something quite normal and explainable." "You didn't see anything, as you drove up the gravel road, from the highway, did you?" "Like what?" Wendy asked. "Well, a bear, or elk, I don't know, cattle?" At this point Kathy's voice rose in pitch. "Tell me what happened," Wendy said softly, leaning forward across the table. "What did you see, or hear?" Kathy raised her hand and absently rubbed her forehead as she looked at her coffee mug. Wendy knew that Kathy was already seeing something else, something vague and distant, that she was bringing to the fore. "I don't know," Kathy began. "I was having this dream. It was a silly dream about people that I have not seen in years. But the strange part was that in this dream I could hear this muffled thumping. You know, like sometimes you can hear your own heartbeat at night, when your ear is pressed hard against a pillow." She looked at Wendy and took a sip from her coffee cup. "But that wasn't really originating in my dream," she continued. "The noise, it was coming from the outside, from outside the cabin. It was like someone dropping something heavy on the ground, like a bag of flour, then picking it up and dropping it, again and again. Then something brushed against the side of the cabin. I could see moonlight coming through the curtains. So, I got up and went to the window to see if I could see anything. And for a moment, I thought that I saw a face. Thinking back, maybe it was only twigs and branches blocking out the moonlight. But, at the time it seemed to be very real. Now, I don't know." Putting her elbow on the table, she covered her mouth with her hand and looked at the younger woman. "Listen," said Wendy. "I'm going to go out and take a look around the cabin. I will see if I can come across anything." "No, don't do that, Wendy," Kathy gasped, bringing her hand to her mouth. "Once again. It will soon be light out. Or, at least, take gun with you." "I'll be fine, Kathy," Wendy assured her with a wave of her hand. "I've spent my life on the res. I have come across every animal that's out there. But I will tell you what. She pointed at the shotgun next to Kathy. "Is that pump loaded?" Kathy gave a quick nod. Wendy moved behind Kathy and picked up the gun. Resting it in the crook of her arm, she took a flashlight from the countertop. "I'll be right back," she tossed over her shoulder. As she opened the back door and stepped out onto the deck, she gently closed the door behind her. Wendy moved the beam of the flashlight in a slow sweeping arc as she crossed the deck to the top of the steps. She noted a sprinkling of cracker crumbs on the damp planks of wood which led down to an open grassy lawn. Kathy had been feeding critters, she commented. She shone the light towards the edge of the lawn, then directed the beam into the darkness of the woods beyond, exposing the mossy rock face and bramble of the steep hillside which made up the property's northern boundary. Nothing could come from that direction. Without great difficulty, as she made her way along the back of the cabin, a lightening sky was discernible in the stillness of the early morning air. The lawn gave way to encroaching blackberry bushes, their thorns sharp and exposed. There was no sign of passage to be found amid the barrier of stalks, which ran from the backyard to the road in front of the cabin, the exception being a swath that had been cut along the entire side of the cabin for a width of some 4 feet. Up ahead a small clearing was cut into the bramble, allowed for the placement of a shed where firewood was stored. From there the swath continued along the wall, onto the front yard. On this side of the cabin were the bedroom windows, and Wendy made note of the fact that because of the way the land sloped downward from the front of the cabin to the back, the windows themselves were a good 6 feet above ground. This was especially the case with the back bedroom, where Kathy slept. Breathing deeply, she took in the scents of the early morning. As her hand slid along the cabin wall, she stopped for a moment at a spot where the edge of a piece of clapboard had worked loose. Gently touching the siding, she leaned forward and sniffed at the spot where the wood was coming off and then moved on. Now coming to the bedroom window, she could clearly see that the sill was located well over her head. Kathy said the intruder had stood here looking into the room. She backed away and shone the beam from the flashlight toward the ground. It was a feeble light, now that dawn had arrived, but it helped her discern something which might have otherwise missed. She studied the ground beneath the window for a length of time, then with closed eyes she breathed deeply. A few moments passed before she once again opened her eyes. Then, with a frown, she continued, on her way to the front steps. Kathy was still seated at the kitchen table when she re-entered the cabin. Pursing her lips and raising her eyebrows, she gave her head a shake. "I didn't see anything except a possible track. It was a big one, maybe a grizzly, maybe something else. It might be a sow looking for food for her cubs before heading up into the alpine area for the summer." "And you found this track under my bedroom window?" asked Kathy. Wendy nodded. "Show me," said Kathy, getting up from the table. With Wendy in the lead, the two women headed out the kitchen door and crossing the deck made their way down to the grassy backyard. Kathy stopped on the lawn as a morning breeze tugged at her strands of hair. She looked cautiously at the tree line, as if expecting the creature to come lumbering out of the forest at any moment. Following Wendy around the corner of the cabin, Kathy clutched her robe tightly around her as they came to a halt beneath the bedroom window. Getting down on her knees, the girl pointed towards an imprint in the soil. They both could see the outline of a pad and toes. "It is almost like a footprint," exclaimed Kathy, bending to get a closer look. "I've seen these types of tracks before. I've seen black bear tracks on the beach at Harrison," Kathy whispered. "They were nowhere near this size." "I don't think it is a bear," said Wendy, getting up and brushing off her knees. "Maybe you should tell me what went on last night." Safely back in the brightness of the kitchen, the two women refilled their coffee mugs. After a while, Kathy told Wendy more details. She spoke about the soul-shattering scream which made her cry and how, to her shame, it made her wet herself, and the vibration that made her ribs ache. She did not want that creature inside of her cabin, nor to be locked in a bedroom as the thing lurched through the hall trying to break through the door. "Kathy, I think you should go back to Harrison. Back home to your condo." Wendy could tell that her friend was fearful and that she wanted to be convinced. "You think that I should leave here?" asked Kathy as she looked around the kitchen. "Absolutely," encouraged Wendy, as she pulled her dark hair back from her face. "Listen, if you want, I can get my cousins to come over from the res with their bear hunting dogs. Let them scout the place out for a few days and find out if there is anything around here. Then get it to move on. You don't think that it was a bear, do you? Wendy was silent for a while, slipping her coffee. No, I don't. I have seen tracks like that many times. Sometimes it is a sign that good things are coming to the land, and sometimes it told of bad things coming. That thing's presence last night was not a good thing, Kathy said in a low voice as she looked out her kitchen window. The first sunbeams were dancing across the peaks. After a few moments she continued. So what are we really talking about here? What kind of animal was that last night? I think it was a Bukwas, answered Wendy, leaning back in her chair. A Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you prefer, a Sasquatch. Kathy had to stifle a laugh. You mean that what I encountered last night was something from a totem pole? Kate, all I can tell you is that I do not see it being anything else. It is not just indigenous people who believe in these beings, you know, Wendy. Last night it was something real and threatening that came to my home here. It was no spirit. It was a living, breathing animal. Okay, then, I think that what we must do here is give you some peace of mind. Why don't you get dressed and I will call my cousin to get over here with the dogs? Standing, she took out her phone, and as she walked to the back door, she hit her speed dial. At this point, Kathy found herself relieved to be agreeing with her friend. Even if Wendy stayed with her, she was in no condition for a rematch with whatever it was that had come around last night. She was showered, packed, and had the doors and windows of the cabin secured in 20 minutes flat. She turned the cabin's keys over to Wendy, should she need entry, and thanked the girls for coming to her rescue. Within minutes they were back on the highway with Kathy's truck in the lead. Wendy's phone rang, and it was Kathy in the vehicle ahead. Do you really think that it is possible for you to get your cousins out here with a dog, I mean? Asked Kathy. You bet, laughed Wendy, putting the phone on speaker, then rolled down the window a crack letting in the morning air. And not just one dog, she continued. They have 5 in all. My cousins, Kevin and George, plus my uncle, Lucas, have them over in Harrison Bay. They're probably the best bear trackers in the lower mainland. I don't recall hearing about the cousins. I thought I knew most of the people on the various reservations. Wendy tapped her horn as Kathy took the exit towards Harrison Hot Springs. She received an answering toot. Maybe you don't know them. Wendy continued the conversation. They are pretty old school. They are followers of the old ways. If you are going to live around my Gran Serafina, then you had better want to take things seriously, or she will soon straighten you out. Your gram scares the shit out of people, including me. Well, see if you can set it up, sweetheart. And keep in touch, Kathy. Before you go, my cousin said that there is a researcher over in Chilliwack who looks into this kind of stuff. Really? Hard facts kind of person. No wood spirit stuff, she laughed. From his reputation, there is not a single spiritual bone in his body. You want me to check him out? After a moment Kathy's voice came back over the phone. I will let you handle that. I will be happy with whatever you set up. No offense, but I would not mind a scientific input in all of this. Talk to you soon, then, said Wendy, disconnecting the call. The sun was now all the way up, clearing the forested ridgelines, and the gleaming peaks, which were still covered in a thin veil of snow. The promise of summer in the river land was near. Wendy inserted a thumbnail into the dash receptacle, and before long she was singing along with Imagine Dragons' Whatever It Takes, as she motored back to Tabby and the compound. Later that same morning a white Jeep Wrangler pulled up in front of the, now deserted, Burns cabin. At Ruby Creek the passenger door opened and an elderly Indian stepped out. His hair was silver and braided, and he wore soft moccasins and jeans with a leather vest over his shirt. His eyes were covered with dark sunglasses, and in his hand was a walking stick that was covered in carvings of all manner of creatures and symbols. He stood for a few moments by the front of the Jeep, looking at the cabin. Then the passenger door opened and a mature indigenous female emerged into the sunlight. Her gray hair was trimmed short above her ears and she wore a beaded necklace that lay against her cleavage under a scoop neck top. Over this she wore a white nylon jacket and a pair of jeans and white runners. She too wore dark sunglasses. One might think that she was just another soccer grandparent. Both appeared to be in their late 60s, perhaps, or a very fit couple. In their 70s one got the feeling that the walking stick carried by the male was there just for effect. His movements were sure and deliberate. The woman also showed no hesitation in her movements and her actions were fluid with an underlying confidence. They strode to the cabin, heading directly to the side containing the bedroom windows. She peered at the ground beneath the sill, making small clucking noises with her tongue. "Can you smell it?" she asked, as she took in the rest of the property. Reaching out, she pinched a few strands of hair barely visible on the edge of a loose piece of clapboard. Holding it to her nose, she breathed inward. A look of disgust crossed her face. "This one is not a walker. It is a scourge." "A skinwalker?" Lucas took the strands from her hand and sniffed them. "The girl did right by letting us know, Serafina. I should get the dogs, and drive the 2 walkers, that we are aware of, up into the high country and began a hunt for this evil thing." He dropped the hairs, and rubbing his hand against his jeans, bent to study the footprint. "No," she said softly. "This is a great concern. I want to know what happened all those years ago by the Red Gate, and by doing so, make sure that I never happens again. And it is the creature who made this track who will supply us with the answers that we need, just before it dies. So the walkers should be free to come and go. We can learn about the scourge from their movements, as they never travel the same paths." Putting his hand to her shoulder, he stepped close. "Do you want Wendy involved? Should she make it her decision?" she asked with raised eyebrows. "It is time for her, Serafina. The path grows smaller with each generation." Once they were back in the jeep, Serafina turned to Lucas. "We could use more people looking for sign. We 3 will be too small a group. When Wendy called me before she left here, I suggested for her to contacting a researcher. One with some integrity. Can be our eyes and ears." Lucas started the jeep. "I hope our long wait is over."